This is a fictional emotional story created for reflective and narrative purposes only. It is not intended to promote or glorify any behavior or choice depicted within. Asheville, North Carolina, January. A house. A silence. A marriage. The snow had been falling all morning, soft, steady, and so quiet it barely felt real. It blanketed the porch like a gentle eraser, softening the sharp lines of the world outside. Inside, everything felt harder, colder, not from the weather but from something else. Anna sat by the kitchen window, her fingers wrapped tightly around a lukewarm cup of coffee. She wasn't drinking it anymore. It had become more of an anchor than a comfort. Her eyes traced the faint footprints across the front steps, the ones Ethan had left earlier, before disappearing into the garage without a word. They still lived under the same roof. They still shared the same routines, but somewhere between missed glances and unsaid words, they had stopped living beside each other and started living around one another. Ethan sat a few feet away in the old leather chair near the fireplace. It used to be his favorite place. Now it was just where he landed when he had nothing else to do. He hadn't said much that morning, just a flat observation about the water heater and something about forgetting to pay the gas bill. Anna nodded, said nothing. There was nothing new to say. Every conversation lately had been reduced to practicalities and passive updates. She had shoveled the snow twice already, not because it needed it, but because she needed to feel useful. Because when the silence inside becomes too loud, the only thing left to do is move your body, even if your heart can't follow. She had loved him once, deeply, wildly, without fear, and he had loved her too. But now that love had settled into something more brittle, something that cracked when touched. Sometimes it wasn't the arguments that destroyed a relationship. Sometimes it was the absence of them, the absence of urgency, of repair, of trying. Anna looked over at Ethan again. He was staring into the fire, not really seeing it, not seeing her. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat, like smoke from a fire long since gone out. How had they arrived here? Was it the debt, the layoffs, the exhaustion of trying to keep afloat in a life that no longer felt like theirs? Or was it something smaller, something less noticeable? A slow erosion like the snow outside, melting the edges of what used to be sharp. That morning the house wasn't loud. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, just a quiet that lingered too long. The kind of quiet that feels like a warning. Sometimes it's not desperation that makes you say it. It's the silence that leaves you no other words. Later that evening, the snow was still falling. Outside, it covered the mailbox and the car tires like a second skin. Inside, the silence had shifted but not softened. It was heavier now, more aware of itself. Anna stood by the sink, washing the same plate for the second time. Not because it needed cleaning, but because her hands needed purpose. Ethan was at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. The screen's glow lit the underside of his face in a way that made him look like someone else, someone more distant, more tired. They hadn't eaten dinner. There wasn't much to cook anyway. A can of soup, a half loaf of bread. But it wasn't hunger they were avoiding. It was conversation. And then between one breath and the next, it happened. Anna didn't remember the exact words. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was him. It wasn't spoken like a plan. It came out like a broken sigh, half dare, half surrender. What if we didn't keep pretending? She hadn't meant to say it out loud. She wasn't even sure what it was. Ethan looked up, startled but not angry, just exhausted. Not at her. At everything. There was a pause, long enough for either of them to laugh, to say, "That's ridiculous," to put it back in the air where it came from, but neither did. Instead, Ethan looked down again. The glow of the phone screen returned to his face. His finger tapped the screen once, then again. And then, without looking up, he said, "Just one night. Just to stop feeling like this." There was no decision, no agreement, only the quiet between them, now charged with something unnamed. It wasn't desire. It wasn't curiosity. It was survival, clothed in something more palatable. The next morning, someone responded to the post. A stranger. No photo. No details. Just a message. Available. Respectful. Discreet. Anna stared at the words on the screen. She didn't reply, but she didn't delete it either. From that moment on, their silences began to sound different. Less like avoidance, more like consent. Some doors don't creak when they open. They just quietly change the life behind them. The day it happened, everything was still. The snow had stopped falling, but the sky was still a dull, heavy gray, like it was holding something back. Anna stood in front of the bedroom mirror, adjusting the strap of a wine-colored dress. It wasn't new. It wasn't chosen to impress. It was simply the last thing she owned that hadn't faded, frayed, or stopped fitting. Her hair was half up, half down. Not polished. Not careless. She looked like someone preparing for a conversation she hadn't rehearsed, one she wasn't sure she would survive. From the living room, Ethan's voice floated in, low and unreadable. "You're sure about this?" No judgment. No resistance. Just a question hanging in the quiet like fog. Anna didn't answer. Instead, she tightened her grip on the coffee mug she hadn't touched in over an hour. She spoke without looking up. "It's not about being sure," she said. "It's about having nowhere else to go." Behind her, the house seemed to inhale. Still waiting. She walked down the hallway, past the dim-lit lamps and the carefully folded towel on the nightstand. Little gestures of control in a moment that felt anything but. And then it came. A single chime at the door. Not loud. Not urgent. But it rang through her like a memory she didn't want to remember. Ethan followed her to the entryway. He didn't speak. He didn't touch her. But he was close enough that she could feel his breath behind her. Close enough to remind her of everything they used to be, and everything they no longer were. Her hand hovered above the doorknob. 1 second, she could have stopped, turned around, said no, not like this, but she didn't. When she opened the door, they were already there. 2 men, one older, with silver hair and a coat that looked expensive in a quiet way. The other younger, sharp-eyed, hands in his pockets. They didn't smile. They didn't ask. They didn't need to. Anna stepped aside. They entered without hesitation, moving like they already knew the layout, like they had already imagined this moment a dozen different ways, and each one ended with them being here. Ethan closed the door softly behind them. There was no click of the lock, but Anna felt the shift as clearly as a slammed door. Something had changed. The older man set a black canvas bag down near the hallway wall. No one asked what was in it. No one needed to. Anna looked toward the bedroom and said simply, "This way." Her voice was even, measured. It didn't shake. She wouldn't let it. As she walked ahead, she wasn't guiding strangers. She was leading herself into a version of her life she hadn't planned for. One shaped by quiet decisions made in quiet despair. Behind her, Ethan walked a few steps back. Not watching, not stopping, just following. Not close enough to protect her, not far enough to disappear. And somewhere between the hallway light and the hush of the carpet beneath their steps, Anna knew this would not ruin her, but it would change everything. Sometimes it's not the room that changes. It's who you are once you step into it. The bedroom looked the same. Same yellow glow from the 2 bedside lamps. Same soft sheets Anna had smoothed earlier that afternoon. Same painting above the headboard, the one they'd bought during better times. A quiet beach scene that now felt too peaceful for what was about to unfold. But as she stepped through the doorway, the room shifted. Not in shape, not in color, but in meaning. It no longer felt like a place to rest. It had become a stage. Anna placed a bottle of water and 2 glasses on the side table, not out of habit, out of instinct, as if small details could give her back some sense of control. She could hear them behind her, their coats brushing softly as they moved, their footsteps careful but certain, like they had done this before. Ethan entered last. He didn't stand beside her. He didn't speak. He just moved to the corner armchair and sat down slowly, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze fixed not on her, not on them, but on some space in the middle where he could pretend none of it was happening. Anna didn't face him. She couldn't. Instead, she bent down and took off her flats, one at a time, quiet, steady, each movement deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if she were laying down pieces of herself in careful order before they could be taken from her. Behind her, the younger man moved first. She didn't turn to look. She didn't need to. She felt his presence before his hand gently brushed her hair to one side. It wasn't intimate. It wasn't harsh. Just practiced. His breath smelled faintly of cedar. His fingertips were steady. His touch light but calculated. Anna didn't lean in, didn't lean away. She let it happen, not out of desire, not out of surrender, but because standing still was the only thing she could still choose. From behind, she sensed the older man's presence close in, a hand at her waist, grounding, firm. She closed her eyes for a second, not to escape, but to remember who she was before this moment had a name. In the corner, Ethan still sat, still silent, still absent. She wondered if he was watching, or if he had already left in his mind. And then came the shift, that quiet click inside her that said, from here on, nothing is pretend anymore. It wasn't what happened. It was what he didn't do. The room was still, not peaceful, just tense, like the air itself was bracing for something it couldn't name. Anna stood in the soft light, her back straight, her arms loose at her sides. She wasn't frozen. She wasn't brave. She was just suspended. Behind her, the presence of 2 strangers grew more tangible. They moved with the kind of ease that said they had done this before, not with her, but with others. Enough to know which gestures to offer and which silences to leave untouched. She was aware of every detail, the dim light casting shadows on the wall, the distant crackle of the fireplace in the next room, the slight creak in the wooden floor beneath her feet, and of Ethan, still sitting, still not speaking, still not looking. Anna didn't need saving, but she had hoped quietly, desperately, that he might still see her, that he might remember her hands, her voice, the way she once laughed without fear. Instead, all she felt was absence, not physical, but worse, emotional, a kind of leaving that happens while someone is still in the room. The younger man stood in front of her now, his eyes steady, his hands polite but unreadable. He didn't ask permission, and she didn't offer it, because somehow, without speaking, the boundaries had already shifted. The older man remained behind her, not speaking, not touching, not yet, but present like a quiet force waiting for its cue. Anna let out a slow breath. It didn't tremble, but inside everything was starting to crack. She could feel herself drifting, not into someone else's arms, but away from her own center. There's a moment, she realized, when a person doesn't break like glass. They simply fade, bit by bit, until they no longer recognize the sound of their own silence. She didn't cry, not yet, but in the corner, where Ethan still sat with his gaze fixed on nothing, she felt something collapse. Not the marriage, not the moment, but the idea that someone who loved you could sit still while you unraveled in front of them and do nothing. Not everything that's taken leaves a mark. Some things just stop returning. The light in the room had not changed. The lamp still glowed in soft amber tones. The sheets on the bed remained smooth, untouched in appearance, but something in Anna had shifted, subtly, invisibly, like a crack beneath paint. She no longer noticed the footsteps, no longer tracked who moved when. Her body was still there, still moving, still responding, but her mind had started to drift, not away, but inward, somewhere quiet, somewhere safe, or so she hoped. From time to time, she glanced at the painting above the headboard, the one of the ocean, blue-gray waves curling onto a pale shore. She had always imagined that beach was cold. Now she knew it was. Hands touched her, guided her, repositioned her. It wasn't rough. It wasn't violent. It was practiced, too practiced, like she was part of a scene someone else had rehearsed again and again, and she had simply been cast in the space left behind. In the corner, Ethan no longer sat upright. His silhouette had faded into the shadows of the room. Anna didn't know if his eyes were closed, if he was still watching, or if he'd already left, mentally, emotionally. Maybe that's what broke her most. Not the hands of strangers, but the absence of the only one who once knew the sound of her laugh and the weight of her silence. At some point, she felt her knees falter, not from exhaustion, but from the quiet realization no one was coming to get her out of this. She had chosen this, but not like this. Not to feel wanted, not to feel pleasure, but to remember what it felt like to still exist. To be noticed, if only by those who did not care enough to ask her name. There was a moment, brief, fragile, when she almost said stop, when her mouth opened just slightly, a breath caught in her chest. But she didn't speak, because what would she be stopping? Them? Or the version of herself that had already stepped too far into the silence? She closed her eyes again. And this time she saw herself not in the mirror, not in the room, but as a shadow, not erased, just no longer recognizable. Sometimes the loudest part of a story is what happens when no one is left to hear it. They were gone. No words, no glances back, only the soft sound of the door closing, too gentle to match the weight of what had been left behind. The room was still lit by the bedside lamps, still warm with the echo of bodies that did not belong there. But the air had cooled, not in temperature but in presence, like something essential had left with them. Anna lay still for a moment, not from pain, not from exhaustion, but from not knowing where to begin again. She pulled the sheet over herself, not to hide, but to feel something against her skin that didn't ask anything from her. The house was silent. No footsteps, no creaks, no Ethan. She sat up slowly, her body aching in places she couldn't name, not from what had been done, but from what had been undone. Every motion felt foreign, like borrowing a life that didn't fit anymore. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, not for warmth but for weight, something to hold her together. The hallway was darker now. She moved through it like someone waking from a dream that had no clear beginning, no sharp end. In the kitchen, a single note lay on the table, folded, brief. I stepped out for a bit. Not sure I'll be back tonight. The handwriting was Ethan's, still slightly slanted to the left, still familiar, but the warmth in it gone. Anna didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't break anything. She simply stood there, letting the silence settle into her skin. She poured a glass of water, took a slow sip, then another, each one reminding her that she was still breathing. The snow outside had stopped. She pressed her hand to the window pane, cold against her palm, and looked out into the pale hush of the world. And in that stillness she understood. What she had lost wasn't just love, wasn't just dignity. It was the version of herself that once believed someone would never leave her behind. She turned away from the window, not to forget, but to begin remembering something else, that no matter what is taken, what you choose to keep should always be yourself. Not every ending is loud. Some arrive like a breath you finally remember to take. The house didn't feel haunted. It just felt hollow, like a stage after the actors have left, but the spotlight still burning quietly on the floorboards. Anna sat at the edge of the bed, wrapped in the same blanket from the night before, not to hide, not even to feel safe, but because her own body still felt unfamiliar, like returning to a home you once lived in but no longer recognize. Her eyes landed on the old painting above the headboard again, the quiet beach, the endless gray horizon. It didn't look peaceful anymore. It looked lonely. She thought about the last 24 hours, not the sequence of events, but the moments in between, the pauses, the silences, the way Ethan's presence had thinned until it vanished altogether. And then a question surfaced. Who will I tell this story to? Maybe no one. Maybe just herself on a different day, when the memory is less sharp, when her breath no longer catches on the edges of it. But then again, maybe that's not the point. Maybe this story wasn't meant to be shared, only understood. She stood slowly, walked into the kitchen again, poured another glass of water. This time her hands didn't tremble. Outside, the snow had melted in patches. There were cracks in the ice now, places where the earth was slowly making its way back to the surface. She placed her hand on the doorknob, not to leave, not yet, just to feel what it was like to choose movement again. And in that quiet, she made a promise that even if everything else was taken from her, the comfort, the marriage, the innocence, she would not let go of one last thing, herself. She whispered it, not to the house, not to the memory of Ethan, but to the part of her that had stayed silent too long. If I don't hold on to me, who will? Then as the light shifted across the floor, she turned toward the camera, toward you. Her voice low, steady but honest. If you've made it this far, maybe you've stood at the edge of something unnamed too. Not right, not wrong. Just a place where the next step would cost something. And if you did, if you're still standing, then let this story be a mirror, not a map. You don't have to explain your pain to be heard. You don't have to cross the line to be seen. Talk to someone, write it down. Hold on to yourself before holding on to anyone else, because silence shouldn't be the price you pay for staying. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional truths. It is not meant to encourage or normalize infidelity, emotional manipulation, or unhealthy relationships. Instead, it explores the complex realities behind silence, loss, and the struggle to hold on to identity when connection begins to fade. If you or someone you know is facing emotional isolation, please seek help. You are not alone, and your voice deserves to be heard. Gently, fully, and without shame.